As many tragic stories do, this story begins on a dark and stormy night. Those were the conditions that Philip Paxson was facing as he was driving home from his daughter's ninth birthday party last September. On this particular night, he consulted Google Maps to find the best route home, and Google Maps instructed him to drive down a bridge that didn't exist. As Mr. Paxson turned onto the road containing the bridge, apparently it appeared as if he was going to make it home safely. And soon thereafter, he drove off the road and into the river beneath, where he ended up drowning. His family is now suing Google Maps along with the owners of the bridge and asking for damages resulting from Mr. Paxson's death. Let's have a look at the complaint. As we can see here, Alicia Paxson in the state of North Carolina is suing on behalf of the estate of Philip Paxson as well as on her own behalf. She's suing Google and Alphabet companies. We're going to refer to those later on as the Google Maps defendants, as well as Tarday LLC, James Tarleton, and Hinckley Govan LLC. We're going to be referring to those later on as the bridge defendants. In this complaint, she alleges that on the night of September 30th, Philip Paxson, a devoted husband, father, and proud U.S. Navy veteran, died tragically while driving home from his daughter's ninth birthday party when he drove off of an unmarked, unbarricaded, collapsed bridge in Hickory, North Carolina, while following GPS directions. Mr. Paxson was unaware that the bridge had previously collapsed and instead was under the reasonable belief that the road and bridge was safe to drive on. At that time and for years prior, Google Maps directed drivers to cross over the collapsed bridge when users requested directions through its GPS services. Community members notified Google of the collapsed bridge and the danger its GPS services posed to those unfamiliar with the area. This is a picture of Mr. Paxson and his wife, Alicia. And there he is again with his two daughters. A lot of these are jurisdictional allegations and identifications of the defendants in this particular action. We're going to skip past those and get to the heart of the matter. The Paxson family moved to Hickory in the summer of 2022 after Mr. Paxson, a successful medical device salesman, was promoted and placed in charge of a team of sales professionals in North Carolina. So we're immediately aware that he had only lived in this area for 2 years prior to this particular incident. On or about September 30th, 2022, Mr. and Mrs. Paxson took their daughters to a friend's home to celebrate their daughter's ninth birthday and their friend's child's birthday. Mr. and Mrs. Paxson and their friends originally planned to take their children camping for their birthdays with several other families, but a storm forced them to come up with an alternative plan. Instead of camping, the Paxsons and their friends threw their kids a camping-themed party in a home in the Hickory Woods development, complete with a hot chocolate bar, fire pit, and s'mores. At the conclusion of the party, Mrs. Paxson took her daughters home while Mr. Paxson stayed to help clean up after the party. After Mr. Paxson assisted in the party cleanup, he drove his Jeep Gladiator toward his home in Hickory. Mr. Paxson had not been to the home where the party occurred prior to the night of the incident. So what they're alleging here is that he had no prior knowledge of this particular bridge having been out. And when he came to the bridge, he would not have known that it was out unless there were signs present or if Google Maps had alerted him to the fact that the bridge was not in operation. The Paxson family lived approximately 4.3 miles and 10 minutes away from the home where the party occurred. Upon information and belief, Mr. Paxson was generally unfamiliar with the Hickory Woods development. So again, they are reiterating that he had no idea what the road conditions were, what the surrounding community was like. Upon information and belief, prior to departing and in order to select his route to depart the housing development, Mr. Paxton used the Google Maps application to identify directions home. Google Maps directed Mr. Paxton to travel home over the Snow Creek Bridge. Unbeknownst to Mr. Paxton, a very large section of the Snow Creek Bridge had collapsed in 2013 and was never repaired. So let's recall that this incident occurred in September of 2022, and this bridge collapsed in 2013 and was never repaired after that. So if Google Maps is directing people down this particular bridge, that means that it has been directing people down this particular bridge from 2013 through 2022. Here's a picture of the bridge, or the non-existent bridge. And they've also provided a picture of the route that Google Maps would have sent Mr. Paxton on. And there's a little area down here indicated by this red box where the bridge is said to have existed. They've blown that section up here, and you can see he would have driven down 26th Street Drive and made a left onto 24th Street Place. And somewhere in there, probably around this area, the bridge would have been, but it was not. For years prior to September 30th, 2022, members of the Hickory Woods community living near the bridge fought to have it repaired and barricaded until it could be repaired. At all relevant times, the bridge defendants owned the bridge and or the land adjacent to the bridge and or were responsible for the inspection, upkeep, and maintenance of the bridge. The bridge defendants refused to properly maintain the bridge, leaving it in a horrendously dangerous state of disrepair for years. The bridge defendants refused to place reasonable and proper barricades in front of the hazard to alert drivers of the deadly drop, and failed to enact inspection measures to ensure that the barricades remained in front of the hazard until necessary repairs occurred. So typically when you come across a bridge on a road, it's going to be the city, the county, or the state that's going to be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the bridge. But there are situations in which private individuals own particular areas of land and therefore have undertaken a duty to maintain the roads in those particular areas. In this instance, these plaintiffs are alleging, or this plaintiff is alleging, that the bridge defendants, those two companies and that one individual that we looked at previously, actually owned this particular bridge and or the land on either side of the bridge, and therefore undertook a duty to maintain the bridge. They failed in that duty, obviously, if it existed. On September 22nd, 2020, Hickory resident Kim Ellis used the Suggest and Edit feature on Google Maps to place the Google Maps defendants on notice that the Snow Creek Bridge had washed away. So what we're looking at is an email from Google Maps thanking Ms. Ellis for her suggestion regarding the Snow Creek the Snow Creek Bridge. The email, it's a little small, but it says, "The bridge over Snow Creek washed away several years ago with no plans in place to repair it. Please make this road reflect that on Google Maps so that it doesn't send people down this road. Thank you." And she has given them a link to a news article indicating that the bridge was not in existence. And again, this was on September 20th, 2020, 2 years prior to the incident. The email above, received by Ms. Ellis, indicated that her notification was in review. The Google Maps defendants took no action in response to Ms. Ellis's notice. On November 11th, 2020, Ms. Ellis again contacted the Google Maps defendants via the Suggest and Edit feature, pleading for Google Maps to update its navigation system. In this particular email, She indicates that the developers refuse to fix it, so you're not able to cross this road. GPS sends people down here, which is especially dangerous for emergency vehicles. Precious time can be wasted trying to get to the other side of the neighborhood through this road. You actually have to drive several minutes out to get there. Not good. Please update this map so GPS is accurate. Thank you. Again, the Google Maps defendants took no action in response to Ms. Ellis's message, despite the message reading in review. Upon information and belief, Ms. Ellis was not the only citizen who notified Google of the dangerous condition. So what they're doing here is they're inserting an allegation on information and belief. And this allegation is that others notified Google Maps. That's going to allow them discovery into Google's receipts of notifications regarding this particular bridge over the span of the years during which the bridge was not in operation. So now they can add to the 2 notifications that they already have, all the other notifications that Google potentially received regarding this bridge. At the time of the incident, it was dark and raining in the vicinity of the subject bridge. So the fact that it was dark and raining is actually pretty important in this complaint. So when you have, say, a slip and fall accident, a lot of case law is going to point out that we as individuals have a duty to watch where we're going. So if we slip on a banana peel, let's say, and the banana peel had only been there for 5 minutes and the defendant didn't know the banana peel was there, well, it's our duty to watch where we're going and not slip on the banana peel. In this particular case, the driver has a duty to watch where he's going. So what they're doing is they're saying, look, it was dark and it was raining. So his ability to watch where he was going was diminished by the road conditions at that time. So he had to rely more heavily on what Google Maps was telling him. As he drove home from the party while relying upon the directions provided by Google, Mr. Paxson drove onto the Snow Creek Bridge. The bridge had no artificial lighting and the area was pitch black at 11 p.m. So again, it's dark, it's raining, and there's no artificial lighting around. So his ability to perceive that there was no bridge there was severely diminished by the conditions at the time that Google Maps directed him to go across this bridge. While following the dangerous directions the Google Map defendants provided, Mr. Paxson's vehicle drove off the unguarded edge of the bridge and crashed approximately 20 feet below. And here we have a picture of his vehicle the morning after the incident. Mr. Paxson drowned. It wasn't a force of impact that caused him to die that particular night or morning. It was the fact that he was submerged in the water. That's going to give rise to a claim for pain and suffering, because if he had died instantaneously as a result of the impact, then the ability to collect on pain and suffering is severely diminished. But because he drowned, obviously drowning is a painful way to go. So the plaintiff here does have a claim for pain and suffering. Mr. Paxson tragically drowned, leaving behind his wife, Alicia, and his 2 young daughters, his parents, siblings, and countless family members and friends who loved him. After the incident, the Google Maps defendants were once again notified via the suggest and edit feature that the Snow Creek Bridge had collapsed and that Mr. Paxson was killed after following his GPS onto the collapsed bridge. So this edit suggestion was sent by the plaintiff's attorneys on October 10th, 2022. That's after this incident occurred. And the suggest and edit basically says that the bridge has collapsed. It is not clear when driving at night that the bridge washed away. A man following the GPS Maps app was killed when he drove onto the area where this bridge once was. It is absolutely essential that Google Maps correct this issue immediately. This was on October 10th, 2022. As of April 6th, 2023, so 6 months later, and upon information and belief at other times thereafter, the collapsed bridge, unbelievably, was still depicted as a passable road on Google Maps when routing from to and from the addresses that the plaintiff used, despite the Google Maps defendant having been placed on notice yet again of the danger. And here they are providing a set of directions from Google Maps as of April 6th. In their first claim for relief, they are accusing Google Maps defendants, so Google and Alphabet Company, of grossly negligent, and willful and wanton conduct. So this is essentially a negligence claim. The grossly negligent and willful and wanton is just higher degrees of negligence. So we're going to analyze this as a negligence claim. So in order to prevail on a negligence claim, you have to have a duty, a breach, causation, and damages. So those are the elements we're going to be looking for. And the element that is most likely going to be the hardest for the plaintiffs to prove is duty. Google Maps had to have a duty not only to us in general, any users of Google Maps, but to this plaintiff in particular. And as far as I know, that duty has not yet been identified. It's as far as case law is concerned. I don't know of any specific case that says Google Maps, by providing this service, has taken on a duty to us as users of the service. But that's not to say that it does not have a duty. So let's get into these allegations. Upon information and belief in 2014, and there's a separate allegation going all the way to 2023, the Google Maps defendants provided directions to users, directing them to drive over the collapsed bridge described above. The Google Maps defendants had actual notice that the Snow Creek Bridge had collapsed. The Google Maps defendants had actual notice that continuing to route drivers over the Snow Creek Bridge would be extremely dangerous and likely lead to death. The Google Maps defendants had a duty to update their maps. So here we're getting into the duty allegations. Had a duty to update their maps when notified of impassable road conditions and or dangerous road conditions. So there's an open question. Does Google Maps have a duty to update their maps when they're notified that certain roads are impassable or dangerous? And we're going to see several allegations of duty. That way, if they lose on one, they still got other duties that they got to lose on all of them in order for Google Maps defendants to be able to prevail in this action. The Google Maps defendants had a duty not to route users to travel across bridges which had collapsed. That kind of collapses back into whether or not they have a duty in the first place to update their maps. The Google Maps defendants had a duty to timely review and investigate feedback made via its suggest and edit feature. Again, this is an open question. Do they have a duty to review and investigate the feedback? So arguably they do, because as users of Google Maps, if they are inviting us to use the suggest and edit feature to alter their maps, then they are telling us as users of the service that when we provide such information, they do in fact update their maps. But how does that duty play into this particular plaintiff who did not suggest the edit that was needed here? That may not be a requirement, but we'll see how the court deals with it. The Google Maps defendants had a duty to employ workers to review edits made in the Suggest and Edit feature and to investigate and edit the maps if their navigation system directed users into or onto dangerous conditions and or paths. So a likely defense is, well, it would just cost too much. It would be overly burdensome for us to have to hire the number of employees and workers that it would take to review these millions of suggestions that we get every year. And the obvious response to that is, well, then you shouldn't have taken on that duty. And they're saying you did have a duty to employ those workers no matter what the cost is. If the cost is unbearable, then don't provide the service. The Google Maps defendants had a duty to timely update their maps in response to user feedback. The Google Maps defendants violated their duties and were negligent in the following ways. So we're going to go over a couple of these. Failing to timely investigate user feedback about the Snow Creek Bridge. That's probably a duty that they took on that they failed to meet. Failing to implement systems to ensure user feedback was timely reviewed and investigated. This goes back to whether they had the workers in place to look at the user feedback. Disregarding user feedback about hazards posted by the Snow Creek Bridge. Failing to warn drivers like Mr. Paxson that Google Maps does not timely respond to user feedback. So let's say they don't have a duty to actually respond to the feedback, but they have given us the opportunity to provide the feedback. What they're alleging here is essentially that they then failed in their duty to warn us that they don't respond to such feedback. And had they done so, that would have led us to believe that we can't trust Google Maps as well as they would like for us to trust them. So we need to be more cautious when we're using Google Maps. They're alleging they didn't do any of that. Failing to warn drivers like Mr. Paxson that Google Maps does not timely respond to user feedback. Inducing users to rely upon the navigation suggestions to their own detriment. Directing Mr. Paxson onto Snow Creek Bridge when they had actual notice that Snow Creek Bridge was not navigable. Displaying the Snow Creek Bridge as navigable on Google Maps. And here's a very interesting one. Failing to use traffic data to identify that no drivers had used the Snow Creek Bridge since 2013. So anybody who's used Google Maps knows that when you get into a spot of heavy traffic, Google Maps is going to show the route as either orange or red. And essentially what they're doing is they're gathering data real time from our phone or whatever thing we're using, device we're using, from our connection to their satellites. They're receiving data regarding how fast we're going as compared to all the other cars on the road at that time. And if all the cars are going slowly, then Google Maps knows that there is some sort of a backup. And so it's going to display that section of the road in orange and red. So there is a connection that's going back and forth. That is being shared back and forth. And essentially what they're alleging here is you've had 10 years of data showing that nobody has used Snow Creek Bridge in all that time. And you've done absolutely nothing with that data. You haven't looked into it, investigated it. You haven't taken Snow Creek Bridge off your app. You haven't run a Google search to see if any of your complaints, any of your suggestion edits had Snow Creek Bridge written in it. For an app like this to not use the resources that we know it has available to them to update dangerous conditions on the roads that we are accustomed to relying on them to navigate, could be seen as a dereliction of a duty. Selling and or providing a defective navigation application to the public. So this is kind of a product's liability allegation. They're saying that your product was inherently flawed. Um, it's defective in its either its design or in the way that you've put this together. It's defective because you're not updating it. You're not updating it accurately in any case. As a direct and proximate result of the negligence, Mr. Paxson sustained severe and fatal injuries to and about his body, which caused him to suffer until his death great pain in body and mind. So we've got the duty and the breach. This deals with the causation and the damages. Obviously, if Google Maps failed in their duty, breached their duty, or had a duty, breached their duty, the causation and damages piece is going to be easy for the plaintiff to prove. Similarly, in the second claim, this is against the bridge defendants. Obviously, if the bridge defendants owned this section of the road, they had a duty. And that's what these allegations are going toward. They failed in that duty because they failed to maintain the bridge. They failed to put signs up. They failed to barricade that section of the road. They failed to do anything. And again, the bridge defendants too would be liable for those injuries. The third claim is just for punitive damages, and that's once you elevate the negligence claim from a simple negligence to grossly negligent or intentional or reckless conduct, then you open the door to potential punitive damages. So that's what they're asking for here. And then the final claim is a derivative claim. This is the single claim that the wife has in her individual capacity. And a loss of consortium claim is basically a spouse's right to claim damages for her own loss of having their spouse, essentially. So that's what we've got as far as the complaint is concerned. And this is going to be interesting to watch from a defensive standpoint. How does Google deal with this? Because if the plaintiff prevails here, then that is going to open them up to liability elsewhere unless they improve their systems, especially with respect to the suggest and edit feature, because that's probably what this case is going to turn on. The fact that they had specific prior knowledge regarding this particular bridge. But until those defenses come out, we don't know. But for now, my name is Nathan Saunders, and this is The Legal Good.